That is a lovely shot. That's 6.
Oh, wow. 100 up. Maiden 1-4, Dawid Malan, and he has absolutely blitzed the fastest T20 100 by an Englishman, previously held by Alex Hales with 60 deliveries. Dawid Malan has just brought up his maiden T20 100 of 48 balls. Brilliant.
Pulled into the deep, and Milan will go to 50. A lone fight after Josh Butler. He's a seriously good T20 player, and he's played really well again. 125 for 6.
Hi everyone, and welcome to My Cricket Gear. Today we are looking at the Dawid Malan Players Edition from GM. And for anybody interested in looking at more cricket equipment related content, please feel free to head over to our Instagram page at My Cricket Gear to see more. So this actual Players Edition was purchased from It's Just Cricket, who were previously based in London but have recently moved to Wrexham. But you can go onto their website and you'll see all the products that they have in stock on there. We really like using It's Just Cricket because they go and hand pick a lot of their bats. I think it makes a really big difference compared to retailers that don't hand pick. Not all bats are the same from bat makers. You're trying to find gems, and It's Just Cricket are pretty good at finding them. Unfortunately, with the GM Players Edition bats, GM don't allow any of the retailers to go and pick from their factory, so you kind of get what you're given. So ideally, if you're looking for a Players Edition, I recommend you check the stores which have Players Edition bats in stock, so they can send you the specs and take photos of the face if that's possible, just to reassure you, I guess, before making your purchase. It's Just Cricket also have a really good YouTube channel where you can actually see their review of the same bat that we purchased. I think it's really good if you're looking for things like softs and bags and different things like that. They do a lot of reviews of the products that they get in, so I think it's a really good resource for people to access. Okay, so let's start off with the stickers then. A key part for many people when buying a bat. They really are important in terms of attracting a potential buyer to pick up the bat and try it out. So it's not to be underestimated. Obviously, a lot of the younger players, do like to see which bats players on TV are using. So it's easier for them, if they see the orange here, see the burnt orange on this bat, they'll know, oh, that's the one that Dawid Malan uses, or if it's a blue one that Ben Stokes uses, or the even more blue one that Ollie Pope uses. So I think it is important, at least for distinguishing between the different models from a particular brand. In terms of how the stickers are set up for the GM ones, I do really like them. I think they are very easy on the eye and modern as well. The latest trend at the moment is to show more of the wood. I think GM are sort of one of the pioneers in this period now of showing more wood on their bats. The only one that puts me off slightly is probably the Icon model. The Icon stickers, as nice as they are, and they're a lot more transparent, the glue shows up on the transparent parts when you look up closely at it. It's not so evident on these ones that you see on the Eclipse stickers, but you still see them around the outline there. So yeah, clear stickers, you know which model it is. Obviously you get a Players Edition sticker on the front, signifying what grade it is. You get laser engraving on the back of the bat for the player. You also get stickers on the side telling you that the bat conforms to the MCC laws on bat sizes, and on the other side of the bat you actually get the mentioning GM Now and Totec. So GM Now is made up of 3 components. The first component is that they knock in the bat for 30 minutes, but personally I recommend that you knock in the edges and toes a bit further. The second part is that they apply raw linseed oil onto the bat. Obviously, we all need to oil the bat, so they apply it there to make sure the moisture's locked in. And then the third thing that they do with it is put an anti-scuff sheet on the face of it, so that should help take a lot of the hits on the bats. and yeah, hopefully prolong the life of it. So for the Totec component, obviously it's the bottom of the bat that we're talking about here with this technology. They have two components. The first component is the dry guard. So the dry guard is a material that prevents water from being absorbed by the willow. So it's applied to the toe, but interestingly, and they don't mention it in their description, they actually apply it with a sponge all over the bat. So I'm not sure why they don't mention that part, and they only mention it being on the toe, but that is something that they do. And then the second process is obviously adding the toe guard to the bottom. I like their toe guards. I think they are very durable generally. They're also aesthetically pleasing. You don't get sort of a white or a black, they're sort of more of a neutral colour, so it's not always easy to see that there's actually a toe guard on the bat. But I like the fact that they sand the toe guard down so they're not adding too much more weight to the bottom of the bat. So yeah, stickers overall really nice. One thing to note is because it's a player's edition, they actually orientate the stickers in relation to whether you are a left-handed or right-handed batsman. So in the case here, it's a Dawid Malan player's edition. Dawid actually is a left-handed batsman, so the stickers sort of, when he's looking down at them, when he's batting, then they will be faced the right way around for him. So that's one of those sort of little touches that GM likes to do for their player's edition bats. Okay, so on to the grading for the bat. So one of the most important things, the reason why you pay so much money generally for the different bat levels is depending on how it's been graded. So we'll have a quick walkthrough of the different grades that are here from GM, running all the way from 303 at the bottom, all the way up to original LE. So starting at 303, we've used the descriptions from GM's own website. Probably the best, I think, in the business in terms of actually describing what each grade is and what you should expect to see. So 303 is the lowest grade that they produce in the UK using English willow. This is actually painted and then they put a grain sheet on the top, so it's not one that I've ever seen in any retailers, and if you're a serious cricketer, then yeah, you'd probably be avoiding this particular grade, but this is yeah, their entry-level grade 4. Then the next step up is the 404, and this is where I think, you know, bats start at for the vast majority of people. Yeah, it's bleached, so that means they actually colour it to make any of the sort of blemishes and things, sort of helps to hide them quite a bit. Popular back in the 80s and 90s, but don't really see it that often these days. But yeah, that's what you get for a 404. So with the 606, it sort of starts to become au naturel, and it is what it is in terms of how the willow looks. They haven't tried to colour it in any way, so you expect to see, you know, blemishes and colour on one side. So if you're into things like heartwood, then yeah, you know, you're quite likely to see something like that on there. Fewer grains, obviously it's a grade 3, it's at the lower end for GM. But yeah, I've seen some decent 606s before and they aren't very expensive. So then we move into the grade 2s. So you've got 707 and Signature. I'm not sure why GM puts them together because the 707s are about £50 more than the Signatures are. But yeah, I've seen some really good ones here, and I think for a lot of people this is probably the area they sort of shop in that sort of £150 to £200 mark. You might get bits of blemishes and things on there, but they are starting to look cleaner. You probably find some decent, you know, clean ones, but maybe they only have 5 grains on them, and that might be it. And yeah, you might get a bit of heartwood and whatnot on there, but I think generally pretty good bats in this price range. Okay, so on to 808, which is probably our favourite sort of price level, and in terms of what's available of all the bats at GM, because you pretty much, you know, guaranteed to get good grains. Sometimes you get lots of grains there. It's the blemishes that get them downgraded, and these are where a lot of the higher grade bats, maybe when they've sanded them down, they've seen some defects that weren't on there originally, so you actually getting a bat that may have started off much higher on the grade levels, and you're probably paying somewhere just over £200 for one of those. So I think 808 is a great value pick. I think that's where lots of people should be looking if they want a top performing bat, but they don't want to pay that top end money. So this is where grade 1 starts. If you want a grade 1 bat, then yeah, 909, probably looking at around the £250 to £270 mark if you want to buy them in the shop, and that will get you a grade 1. But I mean, 6 grains is grade 1 now, so I wouldn't expect too much from it. Generally clean. You might get some marks on it, you might get some graping on the edge, but it should be pretty clean. The interesting thing here to look at is how they describe the handles, because you get a treble spring multi-cane handle on all the bats, but the ones lowest down, they'll just say treble spring, which is the 3 cork inserts, and then you move on to good for the grade 3s and the grade 2s, and here they move on to sort of the top quality ones. Now, how do they make them differently? There isn't sort of a special pile in terms of quality. It seems like it all just comes down to weight. So they will use the lighter handles on the higher level bats. So all that means is, yeah, if you're getting a low grade bat, your handles are heavier. Something probably in the 12 to 15 ounce kind of range, which that's pretty heavy. Whereas if you're going top end, then you're probably looking more like 9-10 ounces. So it's quite a big difference, and it's important because it means that by losing some of that weight in the handle, they're able to put it more into the actual bat, so you can have a bigger bat. So that's the difference between the top quality and the good quality and just your bog standard ones. Okay, so I'm only going to be very brief with Signature LE. It's not actually a grade for any of the mainstream models that GM produces for the UK market. I think they might be available in Australia, or there could be some special edition models that some retailers have, like I know Remeda and Owls that have had sort of specific models for just their stores previously, but Signature LE doesn't exist, I think, for the current models that GM stocks. So yeah, read the description, but I haven't really got anything to add about it. Okay, so original, really like this grade of Willow. It's basically as good as the top grade stuff, just maybe a bit of colour on it. Very, very minor cosmetic blemishes on it, but yeah, pretty decent bat. And I think without needing to go any further, because you are, approaching that sort of £350-400 mark, so I think it's a good place to stop. There you can find some really great bats in that price range. But yeah, we'll move on to what is relevant, I guess, for today's review, and that is the next one. So why have we gone through all these grades? Well, it's partly to show you how much attention to detail GM places on its grading. And they're basically the only brand that goes through and describes what you're going to see at every single grade. So it's not just as simple as grades 4, 3, 2, 1, and now what you get 1 plus, grade 1 plus. Willow is what a lot of people talk about here with GM. They're being descriptive, they're trying to give you as much detail, and I think it's great to try and be as transparent as that. Now, they're not always perfect. I've found plenty of bats that haven't matched up to these descriptions there, but I think they do stick to them very well generally. One question I do get asked quite a lot is what happens if in terms of bouncing a ball and testing it on there, how does it work out? And obviously a lot of people know that grading is not related to performance for most brands. It's generally all to do with the appearance, how clean it is, how many grains there are, is there heartwood, which is the darker wood, or sapwood, which is the lighter wood, are there any pin knots in there, is there any graping? All these things kind of decide on the grade of the bat, but it doesn't actually affect the performance in most cases. So, it's very much about the aesthetics when you're thinking about the grading. Now, for GM, if they find a bat that's an in-betweener, so you're not sure whether it should be a higher or a lower grade, that's when they would bounce the balls and test them. And if one seemed to ping a bit better, then they'd put it in a higher grade. And if it was a bit, not such a good performance, then they would downgrade it a little bit. So that's probably the only time for a company like GM that they're really going to get into grading on performance. It's almost always in relation to how it looks. However, there is a caveat with what I've said there in terms of performance, and that is the difference between original LE as a grade and then what you get as a Player's Edition bat. So originally, very small percentage, probably 1% maybe of their willow. It should look perfect. You're talking about, really great grain structure. You're not going to find many clefts like that anyway, ones with those even grains, the straight grains, no blemishes on it. It's pretty exclusive already. But the difference between an original LE and what is a Player's Edition comes down to the weight. So I think that's a key parameter, is that buzzword, the low density that people talk about. I buy into the low density, but it is not the be-all when chasing a bat. If you want a bigger bat and you want it to be big and light, then low density is something that you're going to have to look for. And even for a company like GM, they probably have to search the lower grades, like the originals, the signature LEs, which I've never seen before, and the 909s. And if they can find a decent one, but it's light, there's a good chance that they will upgrade it and turn it into a Player's Edition, because it's almost a must if you are going after those top bats. I mean, a lot of pros bats these days, they don't look that great unless you're on TV all the time. Most first class players, their bats don't look that great, but they need to be big and light. They need more wood behind them. They need that confidence level. So you're talking about a very, very small percentage. I think it's a fraction of a percent, which is what they choose for the Player's Edition bats. It is something that I have a bit of a problem with, if I'm honest, because some of the Player Edition bats that we've had into review haven't really been good enough. But I do think it's also very challenging, not just for GM, but for many of the bat makers, to get constant access to top level willow when the demand is so high for those bats. And the prices, although they're going up like crazy, people are still paying the money and buying them. So I think the availability is a tricky thing, and I think grading, like I said, GM usually get it right most of the time, but when companies are under pressure to find those really nice pieces that are big, they're light, and then they have to perform as well, it's not easy to do, and I think people probably need to be a bit more realistic about it. But then again, you are paying a lot of money. Player's Edition bat is £660 at retail, so you almost feel like you have a right to get one that is flawless and performs fantastically. So if we now look at the bat that we actually got, I would say at first glance it's not original LE, because it's got that colouring on the right hand side, even though it's very, very slight. That would be the thing that detracts from the description of an original LE. But like I said, with Players Editions it's different, because it is about the weight and the density. So this could have been more like an original, and then because of its density it's been made into a Players Edition. In the end, it's up to you what's important. Is it something that you want to hang on a wall for people to look at, or is it something you want to get out there and use? So it has no effect in terms of usability. I care more about the density than the looks of it, and certainly we'll talk more about it. But I think the density is up there as being low density. That's how they managed to get the sizes that they want out of the bats, and that's certainly the case here. So that's not really a mark against it. But if you were using the definition of an original LE, then I would say probably just because of the colour. But again, there are some original LEs that I've seen with the colour on there. So yeah, I can't be so cruel about it, let's say. So on the second pass, slightly closer up, you can see, for me, I guess I would like the grains to be a bit more well defined, and that's a good sort of tip. If you see ones with very prominent grains, they're always good ones to look at. But then again, you know, I've had ones that haven't had such prominent grains and they've been absolutely fine, so it's not a definitive rule. But if you're asking me to be picky, then yeah, I'd look for ones with sort of a deeper grain sort of structure that sort of popped out a bit more. If we then look at even closer up, we'd probably say that yeah, the grains are straight, and that for me is sort of the key thing, more than the grains being even. But again, if you're paying top money, would you like the grains to be perfectly even? I mean, if you've seen the photos of Marley Pope, you know, they're very even and straight, and that's really nice, and you think you're paying a lot of money for that, so shouldn't it be like that? But for me, yeah, just because the grains aren't even, I haven't noticed any deficiencies in performance. Again, it's just an aesthetically pleasing thing. And certainly when I've spoken to bat makers, it doesn't really make any difference to them either. The biggest thing to be wary of is when the grains go off at a funny angle, especially around the toe. Then there's a good chance that the bat's going to break up at some point quite easily. So yeah, as long as the grains are straight, I think that's a big thing to look for. So yeah, if I was going to be picky, I would like them to be a bit more even, but not an issue for me buying a player's edition. But again, if you're spending top money, you know, is it something that you want? What's more important for you, how it performs or how it looks? So the all-important shape. Now GM use their DXM technology, so they are able to replicate a shape using a CNC machine, time and time again. There are very few companies that use this type of machinery to do it. It's one of the big reasons why GM can produce so many bats in the UK and compete with the bat makers in India and Pakistan. If they didn't have the machine, then I don't think you would see manufacturing in the UK from them anymore. But yeah, it has a huge advantage because you can repeat the shapes time and again. It's not the be-all, because obviously the piece of willow that's chosen, it is a piece of wood. There are huge variances between them. But the fact that you can repeat the shapes time and again is a big selling point, and that's why GM, you know, achieves such levels of consistency. I think it's a nice shape. Very similar, I think, to the Stokes, the Vince shape that I've seen. Maybe slightly longer hitting area than the Stokes. The Stokes player editions, you know, all that meat is in the hitting area, but I find it drops off a bit faster once it sort of moves beyond the peak of the spine. But the Malan one's extended a little bit, but by and large a very similar shape. If we look at it from the toe angle, then what you'll see is a very full shape. This is what a lot of people prize at the moment. Concaving is kind of out for a lot of people, and when you're spending top money and when you see most of the players on TV, they're all using full bats. The exceptions for GM player editions would be Quinton de Kock, who uses a very concave bat with the spine running into a toe, which is also not a popular thing at the moment. Duckbill, Coley style is very much in. And if you want something like that, but with concaving, then the Ross Taylor bat would probably be the one to go for. But yeah, people expect to see a full bat. That doesn't mean necessarily a dome-shaped convex profile, but it means that, yeah, there's no wood taken out. You can put a ruler which will run from the peak of the spine down to the edge, and that there should be no gap between the ruler and the bat should be a straight line there. That's what you expect to see in terms of a very full bat. But full bats can have a little bit of concaving in them. I've seen Kohli's bats and they have a little bit of wood taken out of them. There's nothing wrong with it in my eyes, but it seems like people are running around chasing the fullest profile that they can kind of get at the moment. Now, listen up, people who want 67mm spines and 40mm edges. The key to achieving that is that you have a semi-round, semi-flat face, basically a face with a 5mm camber. Now, GM, they do a 4.5mm camber, so it's basically 5mm, and the back gauge that you can see in the photo shows the camber at 5mm. It's very important, if it matters to you, that you achieve 67mm spines and 40mm edges. The only way you can achieve both is by having this 5mm camber. If I go on to explain, if you have a flat face, you can achieve a 40mm edge, but you cannot achieve a 67mm spine. The most you should be able to achieve legally is 62mm, because the actual regulations are designed to allow for the 5mm camber. So it's actually 62 plus 5. If you do a flat face and you create 67mm spine, you won't actually be able to get the bat through the gauge. It won't work. So that's why you want to avoid a flat face if you're trying to achieve those specs. Then on the other side, we've got these sort of 7+mm cambers. 7mm is what we would say is a traditional round face. I know Aldred is saying that 5mm is traditional, but from all other bat makers that I've spoken to, and some that have been doing it for a very long time, you're looking at 7mm for that traditional face. And if you go traditional, you will be able to achieve the 67mm spine. That's not an issue, but you won't be able to achieve the 40mm on the edge. Now, for me, edges and spine heights, yes, it's an important measure in this day and age because we are all shopping on the internet. So we don't get to pick up the bats. We just have to rely on the specs that the retailers tell us. But the issue with that is that you kind of need to make sure that you are getting that 5mm camber on the face, because if they put it through a bat gauge and it's a flat face and it looks full, they don't normally flip the gauge upside down so you can see it on the face, and that's where you'll probably see a big gap. So you're not going to achieve those 67mm. Another thing to also remember is once you've knocked in the bat, the edges, and the face as well, you're not going to have 67mm anymore. So the only way you're going to have that after is if the bat was too big to begin with, and then you knocked it in and then you rounded and boned the edges. So yeah, it's just for anybody that really wants to chase those specs. It doesn't guarantee you're going to make a great, get a good bat when it has those measurements. I mean, it could be pressed like a marshmallow, and once you've knocked it in, it's tiny. So yeah, don't rely on that too much. So if you go onto GM's website, you'll be able to look at all the specs for their Player Edition bats, and that's what we do when we're checking, comparing them. It's kind of nice that you get the measurements on there. I don't know of any other brands that really do that, but it sort of potentially it slips you up a bit as a brand, because then you have to be able to hit those numbers. And as I mentioned earlier on, GM have their DXM technology, so that allows them to replicate shapes. So I suppose it's easier for them to guarantee, but there is still a bit of a margin for error with their machinery. I think it's ±1mm, so there can be discrepancies from time to time. Now with this bat, we originally were told by It's Just Cricket that it had a 60mm spine, which was really disappointing when you see on the specs on GM's website it's supposed to be a 66mm spine and a 39mm edge, but when we got it in and we measured it up, we were pleasantly surprised to see that it was actually 64.9mm, which is what I actually thought it was going to be, something like that, because in the actual video review that It's Just Cricket did, they put the bat through a bat gauge, and a 60mm bat is going to fill up a lot less of the gauge, so I kind of had an inkling and thought that it was actually going to be much higher than 60mm. So the bat ending up being 65mm, just 1mm shy of what GM put on their spec sheets. I'm very happy with that, and it is still a really, really big bat. So the edges are 39mm, so that's really impressive. So overall it is giving that look of a very, very big full bat, something that I think a lot of people would be very happy to receive if they bought a player's edition. So toes on a bat are something that I really try and focus on, because for club cricketers in England we're playing on low wickets, and obviously we're not able to hit the middle as often as we would like, so thicker toe I think helps with durability. Here you see 19.3 mils on the toe at the edge and 23.3 mils that's at the middle, and that's pretty decent, especially for a player's edition. A lot of the player's editions I've seen are probably more around the sort of 17-18 mil mark. I do like to see something at least 2 centimeters thick from a toe standpoint, but I know for GM, I guess they're trying to get that pick up a bit lighter, so they're going to take a little bit more off the bottom to aid with that. So 19.3, pretty happy with that, but obviously more would be better. And certainly when you see pros and players, I think I notice, because they're using lighter pieces of wood, I think their company like GM are able to put in thicker toes for them. So the width of the bat, some people ask me about, and I think it's a real sticking point for me, something that really annoys me about a lot of bat makers, especially ones in Asia, where they're narrowing the bats. I'll probably do at least another standalone video all about the width of the bat and why I think it's so important and why they are misleading people, but certainly not an issue here with this GM Players Edition and pretty much any of the GM bats I've come across. They're usually somewhere in that sort of 107.5 to 108 mil. 108 is the legal maximum. I like to see bats that are bang on 108 as much as possible, but anything 107 and up I think is great, especially once you add scuff sheet and edge tape, you're probably going to tip it over 108. So if it's 107 and you plus that, then yeah, it should be fine. Okay, so onto the handle. We'll start with the grip, which is on the top. Really like the hex grip. It's a new edition that they brought in for 2020. The only Players Edition which doesn't have the hex grip is the Aiden Markram model. All the other bats come with the hex grip. Yeah, I really like it. It is pretty light. It's no heavier than a standard chevron, so you're looking at about 1.35 to 1.4 ounces. So somebody that would want sort of a thicker handle, a bit of a heavier one, you might put a second grip on top, or you might swap it out for a heavier grip. But yeah, no issues with it. I know there were some comments wondering about its durability. That I wouldn't really be able to tell you. Certainly no issues with the bats that I've used which have had them so far. I like the fact that it has these bumps and ridges. It creates a nice feeling to grip it with. It does confuse some people. Some people actually think the handle is bumpier, a la Kipax and their Wavex handle, but actually it's a standard cane handle underneath it. There's no funny sort of bumps and ridges on it like you would find on that Kipax handle. So yeah, grip wise, really, really good. So onto the handle itself. At the top you'll see the Made in England sticker. Through that you can see the 3 cork inserts. So GM choose to use cork inserts on all their bats, whereas other companies may use rubber, or some may use a combination of rubber and cork inserts. I think for lower end bats I'd probably prefer to see rubber inserts based on the bats that I've tried out. Certainly I guess the advice I got from Andrew Kember at Salix was that lower end bats would suit to using rubber inserts, just to give them a bit more flex, whereas for that stiffer feel you can put cork inserts into higher end bats, just because the performance of those bats, they're springier anyway. So yeah, a bit of an advantage there, but certainly for Players Edition bats being at the top from GM and having cork inserts, I think is sort of the perfect match. Looking on to the rest of the handle, you'll see the lettered stamp at the top of the knob there. That tells you what year and month the bat was made. I can't remember what month this one's down for, the letter there, but the first letter tells me that it was made this year, which is good to see. And then if we look at the binding itself, it's slightly more cottony. I quite like the ones with a bit more of a sort of a waxy, gluey kind of gloss feel to them, but this particular one has the more sort of cotton style binding on it, which, you know, it's still great. Just, you know, if you're asking me to be picky, it's just, yeah, I prefer the ones that are a bit more, I guess, Keeley or Helfer leather like, where they kind of go for that sort of glossier finish. That's the kind of binding I like to see. So you'll probably be able to see information about the finish in my review of the Aidan Markram bat a bit better. But what I would say is that I'm not really that impressed with GM's finishing. The overall finish I think is great, but the thing that sort of lets it down, and even more so because this is their, you know, players edition, their top bats, is the polishing that they perform on the bats. So you'll notice it on the back of the bat. When you first get the bat, if it's a new one out of the factory, it's all well and good, but then a few weeks later you'll run your hands down the back of the bat and it will feel quite rough. And when you look at it up in the light, you'll see flecks sort of flying off the bat and it looks quite furry. I never see it on bats, you know, from companies like Salix and Labour and Wood, who are super famous for their bat finishing, and they seem to give it that time to polish the bats properly. And even after a few months, as long as it hasn't been used in the rain, then the polish is still on there. The bats still look fantastic, but the GM ones, within a few weeks, they seem to lose that sheen. And if a bat's sitting in the retailers for a number of weeks, if not months, and then a customer comes to buy it, I'm wondering how they will feel when they see the bats. And I just think, you know, top end players edition, it's their marquee bat. They should be spending the time. We're talking about an extra 25 to 30 seconds polishing it. Making sure that they've got wax on the polish head, so when they're polishing the bat, that they are burnishing that wax into it, and that will just give it a really, really good finish, and a finish that will last a lot longer. So yeah, that's probably what I would criticise them for. The bat has a pickup index of 2, so GM rate them from 1 to 5. Should be based on how it feels and not the dead weight of the bat, but some people say it's whatever the weight is, because if they all pick up well, then how do you separate them? But yeah, for me, I mean, this puts it in the sort of 2.8, 2.5 realms. You do want a bat to pick up lighter if possible when it's that big. But yeah, I'd say pickup index of 2 is fair. I think GM do a pretty good job with their pickup index. I think it helps give people a guideline of how it will feel. Maybe something other brands, you know, will pick up, because I think with the number of people buying their bats online, we can only look at photos, or someone can send a video, or someone can bounce a ball to see if it pings and show you that, the sort of limitations as to what they can do. But obviously if you're giving a pickup index, it needs to be realistic. You're not just throwing a number out there for the sake of it, and I think GM generally do very well in terms of that. Some people might, you know, if it's a 2, they might say, well, that could be a 1 or it could be a 3, so there's a little bit of give there. But at least if you know it's on the lighter end of how it picks up, or you want it to pick up heavier, then yeah, I think that's a good gauge. Generally for me, I think I wouldn't go higher than a 3 on the pickup index. 2 is sort of ideal. Haven't come across a pickup index of 1 yet, so if anybody has any, please tell me if it really does feel like a 1. Obviously I'm not going to whack it. I see some people that whack it, doesn't really tell you anything. You're actually looking for it to be a bit softer to see how it rebounds off it. Now this is a heavier mallet, so it'll be harder for it to rebound. I know there's more inertia, but I've got a really lightweight one, mallet, which just bounces and doesn't really tell you anything. So obviously you expect nothing to be happening low down here. So So we're starting to get a bit of action at that point. And then the ping, sort of that middle position. It's going crazy there. Sort of drops off here towards the end of the stickers. Now, one of the signs that I use as a gauge is whether you can get it to ping around where the signature is on a Player's Edition bat, which is very high up there. If you can still get it to ping, like we are here, that's normally a sign of a good one to keep. That means you've got a very big playing area there. And if we look side to side, off centre, it's decent off centre as well, so that's what you're looking for. You're not just looking for a playing area up and down, you want to see from side to side. And there's no need to whack a mallet, which I see some people doing. I mean, we can give it a go, but it doesn't really tell you anything. It's whether you can get that natural rebound from a mallet there. So yeah, that looks good on that side of things. So now if we have a look at bouncing the ball on it, we'll see how we get on. Now, bouncing a ball isn't a definitive gauge. You know, I'm not going to whack it into the ceiling. If you watch videos, you'll see lots of people sort of flicking their wrists. I don't really buy into doing that just for a video to impress people with. And then you also have to think about what kind of ball they're using. This is a Duke's, but reasonably well used. It's probably had about 30 or 40 overs on it. You know, brand new hard cherry is going to bounce a lot more. So yeah, let's see how we get on. Alright, so it's got a slight tinny sound, which tells me it probably needs, you know, it's going to need playing in, probably a bit more knocking in as well. But the response off of it is very good. Now if I put it up against the Ollie Pope bat, obviously this is a bigger bat. This one's also been used a little bit, so we'll see how this one goes. Yeah, so the ping on this one is tighter, that sound, but then the face has been hardened more because it's been used in a game. Whereas with this one here, you know, it still needs to go through those stages, so not a sign of how it's going to end. And that is one of the tricky things when we're looking at bats and reviewing them, is sort of identifying the potential in the bat, not just how it is at this exact moment. But I would say in the sweet spot, it's very, very nice. And how it compares to normal GM bats, well, Players Edition bats, they are generally that bit nicer. There's always that discussion about, you know, GM seem to be pressing them softer, but from what I get from GM, that is not the case. They are pressed exactly the same. It does come down to the density of the willow, and obviously Players Edition bats, you hope that they will get the lightest pieces. You know, they will weigh less for their size, and with the wood being that bit lighter, I think there is a natural characteristic. So if they press them the same, there's more give in the wood, so it does feel softer. But I like the fact that there is a firmer feel to GM bats. I think I've moved away from looking at the soft sort of bats, and ideally you're looking for a firmer bat with a crisper ping. If you can find that characteristic, the ball will go further, so you can forget about how it feels and focus more on how far am I going to hit it. Is this going to get me a boundary? Am I going to be able to hit a maximum? If the bat lacks that firmness on the face, I think it becomes a lot harder to do that. Obviously if you're someone very big like a Chris Gale, and I picked up his bat a couple of months ago, yeah, then it's a different game because the guy's a brute. But for the rest of us, I think you need to make sure you have the faces that are harder. It may not feel so good when you're bouncing a ball on it or using a mallet, and again, that is the sign, trying to work out the potential. It's when you use it in the nets, it's when you use it in a game, that's when you really know. And that's what we try to do, although it was difficult this season. And I think it's important, that people understand that. Don't go for those ones that feel soft, because once you've knocked them in, the bat might be a lot smaller, or it may take you forever to knock it in because it's so soft, and then more likely to damage the bat as well. It shouldn't be the feel that you kind of go to look for. Obviously, you don't want the bat to be dead. You don't want the bat to be overpressed, but I think just be careful of those ones that are underpressed. I don't think any of the GM ones I've come across from any of them, whether they're good or bad, I don't think any of them are underpressed. I think they are, on point with their pressing generally. So yeah, I think this one is a good example of that. I can see the potential in the bat. I think once it's been knocked in a little bit more and played in, it should go very well. Okay, so on to comparisons. The first comparison we'll do is between a Players Edition bat and the standard modelled bats that GM produce in that range. So although Ben Stokes uses the diamond stickers, his bats actually are different from the standard diamond model, as illustrated here. So we have a very nice 707 grade diamond bat, and we also have a Ben Stokes Player Edition. The main difference that people will notice straight away is the fact that Ben Stokes' bat is a full length blade compared to the diamond range, which is using a shorter blade, longer handle setup. Second thing you'll notice is that on Stokes' toe, at the bottom there, it's more of a flat toe. That's what a lot of the pros like to see, whereas the standard diamond one is more round. And then another thing that I notice about a lot of Players Edition bats is that they do thin out the toes, whereas if you compare it to the standard diamond, that seems to be a bit thicker. And the big reason for that is that by putting more wood into the hitting area of the Players Edition, I guess, and needing to balance up the bat a little bit more so it doesn't feel heavy, you want a nice light pickup. They're trimming some wood and making it a bit thinner low down, whereas that isn't as much of a consideration for the standard range of bats. So this gives you an idea of what differences you will see in a Players Edition versus a standard stock model. So the second and more important point is, how do Player Edition bats compare to the actual players' bats? In this photo you can see Dawid Malan back in September when he got his photo taken with his bat. So we've been able to use this image to sort of compare it to our Players Edition bat. They are different. It's not really possible for GM to make huge numbers of actual players' bats to be able to sell to consumers. It's just not possible because that type of willow is not available. It's that rare. If you look at his bat side on comparison, you'll see the swell itself is larger and it extends higher up. Toe isn't that thick, so although I've mentioned a lot of the toes on Players Edition player bats seem to be bigger, I think in the case of Dawid Malan's, nothing stand out there. Shoulders at the end, they kind of finish out quite similar, but it is that swell, that hitting area there, which is large on his bat. And then you have to take into consideration the fact that his bats only weigh 2.7 to 2.8. That's a massive difference compared to the £2 9.9 ounce bat which we have, and it's smaller than his actual bats. So when you take those things, bigger bat, lighter weight, there just aren't enough pieces of willow that can meet those conditions in order for GM to produce players' bats. I think how people have to see Player Edition bats are as the best consumer bat that you can buy on the market. Yes, it's got laser engraving on it, and it's got certain attributes that make it more like a pro's bat, which is, they like the flatter toes, they like the angle when they're looking down at the bat when the toes are a bit flatter. You're getting a big swell in the hitting area. You're getting really good specs, full shape. That's pretty much it. It's light. It's lighter than the stock Willow. It should be bigger and lighter than what you buy from the standard bats. That's why you're paying for a player's edition. So bringing you a lot closer to what a player would use, but it's still not what a player would get. It might be comparable to what a first class player is getting. But if you are a test player, if you are a full-on international, if you are the world #1 T20 batsman in the world, then yeah, you are going to get your pick. But if you are just a normal shopper, a normal club player, I almost feel like it doesn't really matter how much money you want to spend. There is going to be a ceiling because there is just, a limit in terms of availability. So that's how I see things when we are comparing players' bats to player edition models from companies like GM. So if we look at the value proposition for buying a bat like this, it's hard to say because, no one should really be spending this amount of money if they're buying a cricket bat, which they're going to take out and smash to bits. It doesn't seem like particularly good value for money. You may get the performance level that exceeds what you've been using before, but most people should be spending £150 to £200 on a bat. So you're either going to have to be seriously good or seriously bad and need to spend that amount of money to improve you just a little bit. Generally, I'd say for most people that there's no point in spending that amount of money. You're not going to be rewarded for that expense. But if we look at Players Edition bats in general, the top flagship products from other brands, I would say GM are right up there, very, very close, if not at the top for a Players Edition bat from a mainstream brand. You are getting generally very big specs. You are generally getting very nice looking Willow. The ping for me is always really good. It picks up really well. So it does tick a lot of boxes there. It's not 100% foolproof. We've had a couple in that have been disappointing, but by and large, the vast majority of the Players Edition bats and GM that we've seen have been we've been very satisfied with, and then there have been a few of those really, really special gems that we absolutely love as well. So there's always the possibility. It's not a guarantee you're going to get an absolutely amazing bat, but I think you stand a very high probability you'll get a good one, a very good one that ticks all the boxes that you want. And certainly if we're comparing it to Players Edition bats from other brands, the markup in price between the original LE grade and then jumping up to Players Edition is, £50? That isn't much of a jump. If I look at some other brands, especially if you look at the ones from India, their Players Edition bats, or even higher, special, uber exclusive ones, those price points jump up by £100, sometimes £200. So it is a massive increase in price to get the best that they have. Whereas I think GM are being a bit more reasonable in terms of their pricing. I think if you were going to buy an original LE bat anyway, and you had the chance to get a Players Edition and spend the extra £50, if it were me, I would say spend it. I do think you are getting something that is clearly at least a level above an original LE. But should you be spending that amount of money anyway, that would be, that's where the value argument comes in. And for me, I would still say, you're better off buying a £200 bat. You could buy almost 3 £200 bats for the same price. That would be where I think most people should look. But hey, it's not my money you're spending, so you're free to do what you want. One other thing which kind of really annoys me, and I've mentioned it in a lot of the GM Player Edition videos, is a lack of a bat case. It seems like a minor gripe, but if you're spending over £500, you'd expect to get a bat case. Players Editions from other brands include them. Even companies, like Grey Nichols, not just the Indian brands who seem to give you a case with whatever bat you buy. But even Grey Nichols, will do that. If you buy any bat from them now in the UK or in Australia, you're going to get a case. But GM won't do that, and I just think it's a bit lame, really. How much does it cost for them to get a case? Probably £3 or £4. If they don't want to absorb that cost, whack another tenner to the price of the bat. But I think there should be something matched with that. You're buying a signature product, the flagship product for a brand, should include a case. Hopefully as a sign to people, we're helping you protect your investment there. But that's up to them if they don't want to charge it. If they'd rather people spent $12.99 and bought a case themselves, then so be it. But I think it would make sense for your signature product to have a case that goes with it. So that would probably be the only other thing in relation to value that I would talk about today. Right, conclusion time. What do I think of this Dawid Malan Players Edition? Well, if I'm comparing GM Player Edition bats generally, I think, for that kind of money, if you're going to spend that amount, then I think it's hard to see past a GM Players Edition. This particular bat I thought was absolutely lovely. Really, really liked it. It had the specs I wanted to see. In terms of ping, it's right up there. Pickup was really, really nice as well. Had a lot of things going for it. There isn't really much to criticise it, I suppose, on the appearance of the grain structure there. But it's really, really hard to get top-end willow at the moment. I think all bat manufacturers seem to be struggling to get the really good stuff consistently. There are not really many sort of negatives about it. I mean, to be honest, I want to hold on to this one and fit it into my top 6 for next year. But someone did contact me about the bat, and I have begrudgingly agreed to sell it. So that's on its way to Australia at the moment. It's a bit of a shame. I think if I'd got it maybe a month earlier, it probably would have snuck into my top 6. It's a really, really nice bat. But when we review, we don't just try to look at the single bat that we look at. We are trying to get people to understand about the probability of you getting a bat as good as that. I would say you've probably got about an 80% chance of getting one as good as that from GM. The only caveat, that 20%, is that we have had a couple of blips, ones that I don't think, considering the amounts of money we had to spend, that they would really be worth that. But generally, I think you're getting a really good product for a mainstream brand to supply a product that good at that price point. Of the ones we've come across so far, probably Grey Nichols in Australia, their player edition bats, and from what we've heard from other people, their players' bats are really special. I think from the Indian brands, we'll be reviewing some of those coming up. We've got the Alex Hales from DSC. We've got the Super Selects to review, which is supposedly a level beyond a player's bat. We've got a few more sort of coming in for us to review and share with you. So look out for those reviews. Thanks for watching this really, really long review. YouTube, we will be posting full reviews like this. On Instagram, we'll be posting all the other stuff. So if you really want to follow and see what we're up to, looking at what bats and other cricket equipment we have coming in, then follow us on Instagram is probably your best bet instead of YouTube. YouTube will just be posting, I guess, the full length videos like this. Thanks for watching it today, and hope you all enjoy the future videos that we have coming up soon. Take care.